Since the autumn of 2018, when Jodie Whittaker replaced Peter Capaldi as the Doctor, and Chris Chibnall replaced Stephen Moffat as the showrunner, the series has increasingly gone downhill. It's a series that certainly had its fans, but has seen a lot of conflict between fans, and bred a lot of controversy. But through COVID, Doctor has shown it can still inspire hope, with the lockdown rewatches, organised by Emily Cook, who has kept the fandom a place of positivity. Therefore, there was a lot of pressure on the New Year Day special, Revolution of the Daleks, to continue to inspire that hope. Revolution of the Daleks acts like much of a sequel to the 2019 New Year special, Resolution, with Jack Robertson, played by Chris Noth, last seen in Arachnids in the UK, taking the remains of the Dalek technology after the events of Resolution to build his own security drones to help battle against the inconfidence in leadership and the opposition of the people, something that has become increasingly more relevant. Yaz, Ryan and Graham have been abandoned on Earth by the Doctor for 10 months, as they band together to stop this threat, as the Doctor, having been left in prison for decades, is soon rescued by an old friend, by Captain Jack Harkness, as they make their way back to Earth to discover the Dalek threat. The description of the plot I've given you is a more truthful version I've put together, but that's not how the episode was marketed. It was marketed as a story about how the Doctor was stuck in prison, whilst Jack and the fam have to band together to stop the Daleks, which was simply not true, as the Doctor escapes within 20 minutes of the story. With it being such a fundamental part of the marketing that proved misleading, then I think it's best to discuss that unused aspect and the 13th Doctor's role in this story first. What we see in the prison is fantastic. Seeing the Doctor isolated and alone, seeing her loneliness having an impact on her, with great cameos from the Weeping Angels, Sycorax, Ood, Silence. Not so pleased to see the Pating, but I'm not going to kick up a fuss about it. But then she is just rescued by Captain Jack within 20 minutes. I do think getting her out of jail quickly brought her back down to Earth with the Daleks more quickly and gave us more time to see the great chemistry between Jodie Whittaker and John Barrowman. But it's still a massive missed opportunity. Jodie Whittaker has been great in the role of the Doctor throughout her run, but she has been continued to be underutilised, and the series has really failed to utilise her acting potential. Seeing the Doctor struggle with her own state of mind and her loneliness, and struggle with coming to terms with herself as the timeless child, is a great idea for a story. Seeing her band together with other villains in the prison to escape. A prison escape story in Doctor Who is a great blending of genres, which proves Doctor Who to be so versatile. But it's Chris Chibnall's overstuffing of the plot that holds Jodie Whittaker back as the Doctor, because she deserved her own time to shine, and this storyline deserved a story of its own, rather than being delegated to 20 minutes of screen time. We also have the fact that when the Doctor returns back to Earth to see the fam, she does not seem to have changed a lot, and the events of both the time with children and her experience in prison does not seem to have had much impact on her. I know the Doctor is trying to act as this friendly and outgoing best friend with a facade, try and mask her insecurity and her pain, but you would think it would have some impact on her character. Given how Peter Capaldi's Doctor evolves from series 8 to 9 to 10, how William Hartnell's Doctor evolves across the first season of the show to the second, and how Peter Davison's Doctor slowly loses his optimism from all the death and destruction of his lifestyle, you would think this would have more impact on her character. That being said, I like how the facade and personality that the Doctor projects for all her companions. I like that I begin to see through it. The Doctor clearly feels a lot of guilt and responsibility for leaving her friends on Earth for 10 months. And I like seeing her come to terms with that by trying to make small talk with Ryan to try and rebuild bridges. But it is clear Ryan has moved on beyond the Doctor and matured, and now can see through the facade. She is forced to be honest and open with him, and it's clear from their conversation Ryan has now a better handling of his emotions than the Doctor, who tends to bury her pain and keep running in fear. But through her conversation with Ryan, she realises that her friends support her. I like the last scene where we see that the Doctor has been fearing that Ryan may leave, but she was denying herself the truth that he would stay. She feels she has missed her time with him, and only shows her true emotions when facing away from the rest of the fam, as you see her pain. She's clearly trying to hold on to as much of the fam as she can, trying to hold on to Graham and Yaz. The Doctor at the end considering going back to change the timeline is not a serious consideration. It's a way of her voicing her insecurities. She feels vulnerable without the fam, and she knows her trust with Yaz is in a more fragile place, and she may in time have to learn to be more honest with her, and she's scared of that. There's a lot of great emotion in these moments. I've always enjoyed Jodie Whittaker's bubbly and impulsive personality and the way she aggravates and manipulates her enemies. And I like how she lures the Daleks inside the spare TARDIS to send them into the void. Her using her humour to outwit them is very clever. I also enjoy the Doctor's confrontation with Jack Robertson. Her direct conflict made her much more strong in her dynamic than in Iraq in UK. Her shock at seeing the drones and her confusion shows her great disgust, hate and history of the Daleks, as well as her speech to Jack Robertson about the hatred of the Daleks, how they need to stop the hate of the Daleks spreading. You can see the anger on her face. But what I really didn't like was how Jack Robertson's end frames her character. It makes sense that Jack Robertson would continue to go unpunished for his actions. But the Doctor had the opportunity at the end of the story to stop him. Do something to stop him doing something like this again, and she didn't. Which makes her responsible for continuing to go unpunished. It reflects badly upon the Doctor. We also have an incredibly clumsy character arc for the Doctor in this story that makes no sense. Essentially the Cybermen and the Timeless Children saw the Doctor come to terms with herself as the Timeless Child. And for me, she accepted herself for who she was way too quickly, in a storyline that changed my own perspective of how I see the Doctor, but did very little for the Doctor for who she is now, as the fugitive Doctor basically told her that she is not limited by who she was before, and she accepted that at the end of the Time of the Children, robbing the audience of a character arc of character exploration and acceptance. Revolution of the Daleks then basically decides to forget all that, to tell the exact same character arc again off screen. We are told she struggled in coming to terms with who she was in prison, but now she's decided she is the Doctor and her past does not matter. Her purpose is to stop the Daleks. It's a strong idea that facing her greatest enemy gives her a better perspective of who she is, but it's rushed, and the character arc happens off screen. And the Doctor we see in this story does not seem to be massively impacted by the Timeless Child. As Mr. Taj has pointed out, there was a character arc freshly baked for Chris Chibnall to use. When we met Captain Jack in The Empty Child and the Doctor Dances, he had lost 2 years of his memory, where he did not know who he was and what he did in that time. Surely this would be a great chance for Jack to provide some perspective on how he carried on to build a new life, and that would allow the Doctor to grow with further perspective. It seems like such an obvious opportunity that fits within the story and would enhance it. Jodie Whittaker is strong in this story, as she always has been, but she is simply made to do the same thing story after story after story, and her character has been failed to be challenged effectively. Now I've got that aspect out of the way, I think it's time to jump into the main storyline and its themes. I like how the story acts as a sequel to Resolution, as it gives the series a sense of continuity. The story also has very relevant and compelling themes, with the idea of security at the expense of freedom, and our lack of confidence in our leaders. I think Revolution of the Daleks is probably Chris Chibnall's most effective use of political subtext. It still suffers from being underdeveloped, but Chris Chibnall seems to have confidence in his script and in the audience. The idea of the lack of faith in leadership was relevant when this story was written back in 2019, and it's since become more relevant with everything that's happened in 2020, showing the incompetence in our world leaders. Admittedly outdated, but Joe Patterson, played by Harriet Walter, is very obviously based upon Prime Minister Theresa May, as the story was probably written sometime in 2019, and her time as Prime Minister came to an end over a year ago, replaced by Boris Johnson. This does come across a little outdated, but that being said, it is an effective parallel. Theresa May's legacy has since been defined by her failure to deliver Brexit. She lost the confidence of the British public over time, with her lack of strength and leadership, and having a subdued personality, unable to gather supporters to her side, causing her to lose more ministers than both Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair, and a misjudged snap election losing her a lot of her reputation. You can see Joe Patterson's Prime Minister very much mirroring Theresa May in her speeches about stability and security. The lack of confidence in Theresa May's leadership came to a head with her Brexit deal, which cost her her role as Prime Minister, with her deal being rejected by Parliament 3 separate times, which has simply become more relevant, with trust in leadership not improving under Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, with his handling of the COVID-19 crisis. 2020 has still shown that a lot of public faith has been taken away in the government. It makes sense that they would try to enforce and control the public rather than trying to improve themselves and improve their own reputation. I think the main problem with Jo Patterson in this story is that she isn't developed as a character, so we can't understand her key motivations, principles, struggles and ideas to either empathise with her or to work as an effective parallel to Theresa May. Her character is not developed enough for the story to have something effective to say about May's policies and her leadership qualities. Chris Chibnall obviously makes a statement, as she is exterminated by the Daleks, but it is unclear what he is trying to say, because the story is very much underdeveloped. I think it feels appropriate now to talk about Jack Robertson, played by Chris Noth, who previously appeared in the 2018 story Arachnids in the UK, and I really didn't like him in that story. Chris Noth played him as an exaggerated parody of Donald Trump, which would have been fine if he had any place in that story, and if the script had any amount of subtlety and didn't feel a need to point out that he was Donald Trump every 5 minutes. But a story like Arachnids in the UK, about the consequences of toxic waste and humanity's carelessness in our treatment of the environment, has no use for a character like Robertson, but he fits much better into a story about security at the expense of freedom. It makes a lot of sense and feels very relevant this year with Trump's handling of the Black Lives Matter protesters. A politically charged story like Revolution of the Daleks is a story Jack Robertson fits perfectly into. Chris Noth's performance hasn't changed. He still plays the same political parody he was before, but the script has a confidence in the audience in the fact that it doesn't need to keep pointing out the fact that he is so similar to Donald Trump, and make him a Trump rival, which makes the character less annoying. His role in the story also makes sense as a single-minded, selfish businessman who has brought out Leo's company and using it to salvage Dalek technology and use the technology for their defense drones. I think his scenes with Leo is where Chris Noth really shines in the role. When Leo is feeling a nervous insecurity about how fast this project is coming along, I really like Robertson's response as he encourages him to embrace the uncertainty. There's a confidence about him. But when Leo shows him the Dalek mutant, there is disgust, and he uses his position, power, bullying and abuse, his attitude, to force him to get rid of it, which very much resembles Trump's tactics and mentality, especially as Robertson expresses his hatred of experts, and Trump has famously had a mistrust of science, facts and experts, taking 19 months to appoint a scientific advisor, being a climate change denier, and reversed a lot of Obama's policies, taking America out of the Paris Climate Agreement, and encouraging the public to inject disinfectant into their bodies as a cure for COVID-19 with no evidence. But the themes of what this is trying to represent and the motives of Robertson are slightly confused. This is showing the bullying attitude and mistrust of Trump, but Robertson's instincts are very much in the right place here. He's preventing chaos and preventing the Dalek race taking control of them, essentially making him a victim, as he does not even know about the facility in Osaka, making him less of a threat to root against. I think Leo works really well though, played by Nathan Stewart Jarrett as the CEO of Regarding Technologies. He has a lot of charm in his performance and he's very likeable. He shows a lot of enthusiasm with a passion and interest in the project, only he's been overruled by the money and power of Robertson, who owns the company. But his gullibility and recklessness in getting involved in what he does not understand in cloning the Dalek DNA, which allows the Daleks to take control, is what causes the chaos which diminishes Robertson's threat. We do get to see the untrustworthy side of Robertson. I love his ego and his confrontations with the Doctor, with a confidence only ever thinking about himself and his own reputation. He briefly tries to team up with the Daleks, which to begin with, I believed was meant to resemble the danger of teaming up with fascists and Nazis, and the consequences of trusting them, as they always portray you. But in fact, the story never really does that, as Jack, Ryan and Graham manage to drag Robertson out of the situation. I think it's meant to resemble the untrustworthy nature of Trump, very much admiring and willing to associate himself with corrupt leaders and dictators, and uses the Daleks as a vehicle to demonstrate that as a clear symbol of evil, showing the untrustworthy nature of Robertson. And whilst I don't like how the Doctor is framed, he is unfortunately realistic and incredibly believable that Robertson would continue to get away with portraying the human race, and be celebrated as a hero with Trump's history of sexual assault allegations, tax fraud, and the Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election, and numerous other activity he has gone unpunished for. I think the ending does work as a sad reflection of reality. I think it's now best to discuss the Daleks. I like the idea of using Dalek DNA to create Dalek mutants on Earth. The Dalek's purpose is to survive and conquer, so it makes sense with its primary instinct. But it leads to a confrontation with the real Daleks, the Time War model, as these Dalek drones and mutations with human DNA, and are very much seen as impure. This reminds me a lot of the conflict between the Renegade Daleks and Imperial Daleks in Remembrance of the Daleks. I like the conflict and battle between these two Dalek factions as a battle of purity, and it's a great way of exploring the Daleks' mentality. The problem is that because there is so much time spent on the build-up to this, the execution of it is lacking, because there's simply not enough time to dedicate to an entertaining battle sequence, which is much of a disappointment and missed opportunity. That being said, just like Resolution, I think the Daleks are very well represented. The Daleks are merciless and ruthless and evil, with the drones destroying anything in their path which stands in their way, and any life which is not Dalek. Then we have the Death Squad Daleks, which is a great idea with a group of Daleks eliminating the impurities in the Dalek race. We have a cloned version of the Reconnaissance Scout from Resolution pleading to be spared, a Dalek that has willingly given itself for the Dalek cause, a loyal soldier, exterminated because of its imperfections and impurities. This perfectly demonstrates the ruthlessness and evil of the Daleks, unable to accept anything which is not their perfect standard in their bloodline. But the Nazi roots of this idea could have been explored a lot more. I think this can be best demonstrated in what the Big Finish story, Blood of the Daleks, achieves. In Blood of the Daleks, we see a character called Martez, a scientist hiding the body of his assistant when everyone believes him to be dead. He's very much an immoral scientist, experimenting with Daleks, with a crashed Dalek spaceship, experimenting with both dead and living human body tissue in a rather Frankenstein kind of way, and finding a way for his people to survive, and ends up creating a new army of Daleks. And obviously, the coloured mutant Daleks very much want to wipe away the impurities. This leads to some interesting moral dilemmas and conflicts, with the Doctor having to side with his age-old enemies to defeat this new army of Daleks, to prevent a second race of Daleks. Martez also very much mirrors Davros as this warped and immoral scientist, and it draws on the Doctor's age and experience as he's seen it all before, and is scared of seeing history repeating itself. There's a lot of potential they could have truly explored in a second part. I'm not saying Revolution of the Daleks needed to repeat Blood of the Daleks, but the idea of the reconnaissance scout having to rebuild the Dalek race and demand approval from the Death Squad Daleks, drawing on its dedication and loyalty to the Dalek race, is a great idea. And it would have been great to see the reconnaissance scouts maybe determined to find a way to be purified, but the Death Squad Daleks simply want to wipe them all out. And maybe the drones believe their mutations are superior against the mentality and will of the reconnaissance scout, causing further conflict. And maybe the reconnaissance scout realises it's gone against the ideology of the Daleks, becomes ashamed of its own blood and what it has created. There's a great opportunity to explore the Daleks' ideology and their obsession with purity that turns out to be much of a missed opportunity. But the Daleks look fantastic in this story, and the direction by Lee Haven-Jones, who previously directed Spyfall Part 2 and Orphan 55, is great. The imagery of the Daleks fighting against each other is brilliant. The overbearing shot of the Dalek spaceship looks very imposing, and the scene of the army of Daleks coming out of the spaceship to enforce their mentality is cinematic and powerful. The Daleks have never looked more threatening. Seeing the TARDIS land at the Bristol suspension bridge and the Daleks flying around it, around the iconic Bristol landmark, will become an iconic image because of the iconic Doctor Who imagery merged with the iconic Bristol landmark. Seeing the TARDIS land mid-air with the Daleks flying around it and seeing them all tricked into the TARDIS shows the Daleks at their most overbearing in scale. Now I want to talk about the return of Captain Jack Harkness, played by John Barrowman. Now Captain Jack made a surprise return in the middle of Series 12 in Fugitive of the Jadoon, but made a full return in this special with a great meet-up with the Doctor. The first time the two had seen each other since the 10th Doctor's regeneration in The End of Time. Jack is just a fun character to have around, and he can fit in to practically any circumstance or place. I love seeing him turn up to rescue the Doctor, and John Barrowman fits right back into the role, and the chemistry between John Barrowman and Jodie Whittaker is great. You have a great deal of friendship between the two. As with previous Doctors, we have the Doctor being stern with Jack, and trying to keep him in check with Jack's cheeky and immature and flirty attitude with humorous one-liners. I think a highlight though are the scenes between Jack and Yaz. Jack is clearly a very experienced character and he can read Yaz like a book. He knows how she is feeling. He knows she's been lost without the Doctor, not knowing if she survived, not knowing if she had abandoned them, not knowing if she was ever going to come back. Jack felt the same way, not knowing why the Doctor left him at the end of Bad Wolf and the parting of the ways. And it sees him reflect on his insecurity as the Doctor said goodbye to him at the end of time. Jack tries to reassure Yaz and lets her know that her time with the Doctor is limited, and it's painful once you have to return to normal life. But the joy and wonder of seeing and appreciating the universe is worth the pain of the loss of the Doctor. Jack just leaving through a voice message, though, was a major disappointment. It was very anticlimactic that the Doctor and Jack didn't get a proper goodbye. He deserved better. But it's probably because he has planned future appearances. I think Yaz, played by Mantis Gill, gets a lot of attention in this story, which he has lacked in the last two series, feeling like a bland and undeveloped character. And I'm glad this story gave her that attention to justify her staying on. Can You Hear Me did briefly touch on the mental health issues of Yaz, and this story further shows that by showing her as a fragile and vulnerable person who's relying on the Doctor, who needs the Doctor. At the beginning of the story, we see Yaz in the spare TARDIS the Doctor sent them home in, determined to find a way back to the Doctor, showing herself as fearless, adamant, and determined, unwilling to give up on the Doctor. The Doctor gave her new opportunities to prove herself, as she had been unfulfilled on Earth as a police officer, and she's been seeking approval from the Doctor, and she is unable to prove herself in the same way back on Earth. She is unable to get the same satisfaction, and feels she's reliant upon the Doctor. But when the Doctor returns, Yaz is angry. The Doctor's been away. She was in prison, and Yaz's anger is ultimately unjustified, but her irrational emotions kick in, as she's been lonely without her, not knowing if she was coming back, and angry at the Doctor for abandoning them and taking everything she was reliant upon away from her. Through her conversation with Jack, we get the sense she has been lost. Her relationship with the Doctor is rather fragile, even after her conversation with Jack. She's unsure where she stands with the Doctor. She knows one day she'll be left without the Doctor. One day she'll abandon her. But she does not want to let the Doctor go. Jack told her her time with the Doctor is limited, so she wants to hold on to it for as long as she can. Through Graham and Ryan's exit, she had the opportunity to leave for her own benefit. But she didn't, which I have a feeling she'll pay for later. Hopefully Yaz will get more attention and development in Series 13, but I am concerned with John Bishop's unnecessary introduction as Dan. I have my doubts. I have no worries for John Bishop as an actor, but we didn't need another companion, especially another one from modern day Earth, which has become a tiresome trend. Then we have Graham and Ryan, played by Bradley Walsh and Tosin Cole. I think Graham is very underutilised in this story. I think Bradley Walsh does his best, as he always does, but for a last story, for a companion, the script gives him nothing to work with, as he simply plays the role of the comedy relief character, with no authenticity in his persona until the end of the episode, where he's utilised properly, which was unfortunately how he was characterised through a lot of Series 12. Then we have Ryan Sinclair, played by Tosin Cole. When Ryan is given a hard-hitting drama, Tosin Cole can really succeed, but a lot of the time he comes across as very wooden, mainly due to the northern accent. There is a clear lack of any kind of emotion throughout a lot of the episode, like when the Doctor lands back on Earth. I don't get any sense of how Ryan feels about this, any kind of emotion. Tosin Cole, I'm sure, is doing his best, but it looks like he doesn't know he's being filmed. But when this story gives Tosin Cole hard-hitting drama, then he succeeds, which is why Ryan's exit feels earned, and is the best part of the episode. Ryan, in Can You Hear Me, expressed concern about becoming more separated from his friends and family, like he was living a different life. We see the conclusion to that character arc in this story, with Ryan having returned home and become a better person for it. He's been there to support his dad, and possibly his friend Tibbo, and become concerned for the affairs of Earth, and inspired by the Doctor to fight against it. We see Ryan as a matured character who has moved beyond the Doctor, but is there to support her. You can see through her facade of acting like the silly best friend and avoiding the subject. Ryan has clearly matured since he met the Doctor. He was emotionally confused when he began travelling with the Doctor, but now he's worked through his issues and become an open and honest and strong person. But that's why it's so frustrating, because Chris Chibnall is capable of a very emotionally powerful, hard-hitting drama, and he demonstrates that in this episode, with a very emotionally fulfilling and powerful exit. Probably the best exit for a companion since Donna. But I wish Chris Chibnall would play on that strength more often, and I might have invested in these characters more throughout their run. The scene where Ryan decides to leave is great. The Doctor influences many companions and turns them into better people, and that's what's happened with Ryan. He began as an emotionally troubled 19-year-old who was very conflicted, working in a warehouse, and he was kind of directionless. The TARDIS and his travels in time and space has shown him the injustice and wrongdoing of the universe, and the Doctor has taught him good values in the value of standing against oppression and standing against wrongdoing and against the values of evil. Ryan, back on Earth, has had time to reflect. He has seen the values of evil reflected on Earth, and the Doctor has inspired him to help stand against it, which is very powerful. Ryan has matured and grown up into someone who wants to stand against evil. Tosin Cole's performance in this scene is great, and it's great to see a companion leave willingly in an optimistic way, like in the classic series with companions like Susan, Victoria, and Joe Grant. Graham shows all the conflict, and I love Bradley Walsh's performance, as the TARDIS was clearly there as an escape for him from grief, as a support network, but now he is willing to move away from that support network. He knows Ryan is his family. He is what's important, and he will be there to support him. They have changed throughout their travels in the TARDIS, as Graham and Ryan have grown closer and developed a family bond, and will always be there to support one another through difficult times. It's optimistic and tragic seeing them say goodbye. I can't say I was overly sad, but that's because I don't have the same investment in their characters that I did with previous companions. Judging alone how this story presents the exit, I think it's very well handled. I like seeing Graham and Ryan's arcs brought full circle in a very optimistic way, with Ryan trying to ride his bike and accepting Graham's help, showing how far they've both come. As someone with dyspraxia, I appreciated that it didn't show Ryan conquer it overnight and suddenly be able to ride a bike. It showed it as an ongoing struggle, and it's great to see Ryan and Graham continue to fight for the Doctor's values, showing her everlasting impact, and them looking upon Grace in the sunlight as they are both thinking of her brings their arcs full circle, showing how Grace has influenced them both. It's a great way to end their characters. So overall, what do I think of Revolution of the Daleks? Well, I think it's a mixed bag. It can be an enjoyable mixed bag, as it's well paced and easy to watch. I think the Daleks are very threatening and merciless and powerful. And I love the scenes of the Dalek Civil War between the Death Squad Daleks and the Drone Daleks. I think it's great to see Captain Jack back. I think Graham and Ryan's exit is fittingly optimistic, emotional and tragic, and shows both of them have been shaped by the Doctor. And Jack Robertson works well within the story, and the political subtext is well presented at least. It can be a fun Dalek story, but far from being one of their best. And that's down to the missed opportunities and underdeveloped themes and ideas. Jodie Whittaker is underutilised as the Doctor because they don't give her the opportunity to explore her character. And the prison storyline is disposed of quickly. The Daleks Civil War is disposed of quickly and underdeveloped, when it could have been very thought-provoking and very powerful in its tackling of the ideology of the Daleks. There are also great themes of security at the expense of freedom, reflecting a lot of the corruption in the political landscape of today's world. But it only presents the ideas and never develops them, or takes any kind of stance, or makes any kind of point about these themes commenting on the state of the world. Political commentary can be powerful, but has no chance at being thought-provoking if it doesn't make any specific point. This is simply because the storyline is cluttered with too much to do and too much to achieve. If it was ever going to work, then Chris Chibnall really needed to simplify the script and fully develop the ideas. This is why Revolution of the Daleks, although one of Chris Chibnall's better scripts, is still one of the biggest missed opportunities of the Jodie Whittaker era so far.